Hi, everyone. Yeah, it's great to be back with you again, and it's great to introduce another episode of Passion, Purpose and Grit, and to introduce those from Sporting Memories. Normally, I get to introduce my guests with a few photos culled from wherever I can find them and a bit of voiceover. Not this time. We're making it musical for very obvious reasons. Very poor editing on the musical side, I have to say. I didn't cut that off very well, but nevertheless, it's great to see Pat Murphey with me here today. The theme tune of Sports Report, the longest running programme on BBC Radio, means so much to so many sports fans. And the man who wrote the book about the first 70 years, Pat Murphey. Pat, very warm welcome to you. We'll talk about the book and Sports Report a bit later, but let's start with you right at the very beginning. How did you get into sport?
Hello, first of all, Alastair. Thank you for having me on your programme. Extremely honoured, and what a great cause. And I hope we'll be bringing some succour and some amusement to people who are less fortunate than ourselves. Fundamentally, like yourself, like so many other people in sport, I was just a sports fanatic. Always was. Cricket and football were my two main sports. I went to university to study law at Hull University, spent all my time going to watch the Tigers play league football, or occasionally getting to see Yorkshire play at Scarborough or at Hull. And I used to write imaginary reports, and my mates used to say, "What are you doing studying law for when you should be doing other things? You should be in journalism." I said, "Well, the handy thing about studying law is with a bit of luck, no one will ever sue me for libel if I ever become a journalist." And believe it or not, Higgy, I started in 1970. I still haven't been done for libel, so fingers crossed. I then became an article clerk to a solicitor in London, hated it, couldn't stand it, gave up, went on the dole after 2 months, sat down, got some Basildon Bond notepaper and envelopes, went to the library, pulled down a copy of the Willings Press Guide, wrote to 50 newspaper groups in Great Britain, offering my services, which were minimal because I had nothing to offer. And I got one interview from the Peterborough Evening Telegraph, hitchhiked it up there from South London. Luckily, the guy had studied chemistry at Durham University, didn't want to be a chemist. He could relate to the fact that I didn't want to be a lawyer, having studied law, gave me the job, was there for 4 years, always wanted to work for the BBC, got a job at Midlands Today television when I first met you, the equivalent to your Points West down in the southwest of England, Midlands Today, did news, sport. Then I always wanted to work for the BBC Radio Sports programme, applied for the job in 1974, been there ever since, got the job. The rest is hysteria.
Yes, but what about as a young lad growing up? Did you have sporting ambitions to play yourself, or?
Oh yeah, well, didn't everybody? I soon realised it wasn't good enough. I was still playing cricket. For 5 years ago for the BBC Midlands team. I finally gave it up because I realised, as W.G. Grace once said, the ground is too far away. My fielding let me down, and eyesight were going. But it was the only team in the world I could get into because I was captain, manager, fixture secretary, and treasurer and social secretary of the BBC Midlands team. I used to stand at slip and sledge my bowlers saying, "They don't bowl that rubbish at me, bend your back." But that was great fun. I ran that team for 40 years. I always wanted to have a team whereby you were somewhere near a church clock, a church spire chiming. You were in the Cotswolds or Herefordshire, whatever. You were near a village pub that served stonking real ale. And that was my ambition once I realised I wasn't good enough. I played football till I was about 30. I was okay, but now spesh. My talent certainly didn't lie in being able to play the game, not like you internationals or you people who played at county cricket and for England at rugby.
So what about your parents? Did they encourage you to play sport? Were you from a sporting family?
Very much family. the old Latin proverb, mens sana in corpore sano, healthy mind and a healthy body. We lived in Chelsea, and 3 sons, sports-mad family. We saw every game of the home season when Chelsea won the league in 1955. That was great fun. And apparently, just a quick word on Sports Report. We used to sit around the table listening to Sports Report when I was a kid, because we were so proud of Eamon Andrews, Irish family. Eamon Andrews, the first major presenter of Sports Report for 14 years, by the way, 12 years rather. Great broadcaster, Eamon Andrews. And sadly died young. And apparently when I was 7, I announced to the table, I'm going to work on that program one day when the signature tune came up. Now, fast forward, what a precocious sniveler I must have been. I don't remember that at all. I was the youngest brother. My mother rang me up in December 1981 when I finally appeared on Sports Report, Leicester City versus Watford. And she said, "You've done it now, son. You've made it. You said you would." I could not believe that. I could not believe I would have said that. Gosh. So they were very proud. They're very proud. My father, to my shame and embarrassment, in his retirement towards the end of his life, used to tape my contributions on radio on a Saturday afternoon in the kitchen. Probably got you down on tape as well, Higgy. Okay. And he used to play that to me whenever I turned up. I thought I didn't know where to look. I used to cringe. I don't know about you. I never want to hear me. Ever. Never. No. So yes, sportsman family, massively encouraged. And as I've always said since then, I never got anywhere near a proper job in the last 50 years. It sure beats working, doesn't it? If you can't play it to the level that you play at, what's better than actually being paid to report on it?
Well, absolutely. But going back to that first reporting job, the Peterborough Mail. Peterborough. So who were you reporting on? There was the Peterborough Football Club, but not much else in the way of sport around there.
Well, first of all, I did news, got my grounding in news, very important. Right. Then I was features editor. I used to do a 2-page weekly column on movies. I used to go down to Wardour Street and watch movies like Don't Look Now and write up those before they came to Peterborough. But Peterborough United, brilliant duo, Noel Campbell, Irish international, and John Barnwell, to whom we still send Christmas cards to each other. John was the number 2. Fine player. When they took over in 72, Campbell and Barnwell said to me, "We want to be on the back page lead every day, Monday to Saturday, and we'll see about that. We'll organize it. Secondly, we think we should be a front page lead at least once a week on your Peterborough Evening Telegraph, 4 editions a day." Done, gentlemen, no problem. So they were great to deal with. And John Weil was the captain, who became a terrific leader for West Brom and then chief executive of West Brom. Great man, Geordie. They couldn't have been more helpful to me. And as I say, it's still nice to keep in touch with Barney. Noel Campbell's passed away.
Was he Nottingham Forest? Was he the
Nottingham Forest? He was in the team that got to the '67 FA Cup final under Johnny Carey and played for Arsenal. Very good, constructive, clever player. John eventually became chief executive of the League Managers Association, looking after managers in trouble. And John, bless his heart, he used to slip me a few stories here and there. He never let me down, John. All that time when I was a BBC broadcaster, I hope it all stemmed from the fact we forged a good working relationship in the early 70s. Higgy, you know, what goes round comes around.
Yeah. But it was great to come across people who were so media savvy, I suppose, at the time, because quite often it was sort of, let's hide it away on the back pages. And people didn't want to blow their own trumpets, did they?
The previous manager, Jim Eiley, Posh had lost, I think it was 8-0. And he headed for the hills, wouldn't talk to anybody, and he soon got sacked. And I remember I had a great idea as featured there to ring up the notable managers and get them to talk about what it's like to be in charge of the 92nd team in the league, which Peterborough were at the time. I got through to Bill Shankly. "Who are you? What do you want?" And I got through to Ron Saunders at Villa, who gave me a lot of time. Terry Neal at Arsenal, Joe Mercer at Manchester City. These guys were big cheeses, and they, from the lofty heights of being top managers with top clubs, they'd sit and talk to me, a scruff who they didn't know, about how they would deal with the 92nd club in the league. It was just a thrill. How's the light, Higgy? Are you all right with the light?
I'm happy with it. But I'm not technical.
I can put the light on.
Technological even as you are. But so you talk to these these people, and that was really all about phoning up and bashing the phone. But it was obvious from early on.
I'm going to see them, Higgy. Can I just underline that point?
Yeah.
Modern journalism is too much about keyboard warriors. You have to get out, put yourself out, talk to people face to face, as you know. We'll come to that later. I was a fixture in the Gloucester's dressing room for a long time, wasn't I? Got to know you as well. You can't do that sat on the phone. And at Peterborough, for example, I could walk down the road to London Road. Northants came and played second 11 cricket at Peterborough. I met people like Jeff Cook, who's been a lifelong friend ever since. Best man at my wedding. Great man, Jeff Cook, still in touch with them up in the Northeast, personal friends. So you have to develop a working relationship whereby they recognize you, and updating it to modern parlance, Higgy, you want to be on their speed dial. They see you up on your phone and they press a button, or they say, oh, I can't be bothered talking to him. That to me is one of the acid tests of a sports journalist. Will people take your calls?
Yeah, but it was obvious as well from what you were saying that you had a news sense as well, because, you know, we often hear about fans with typewriters and, you know, people who confuse the two and go, well, talk about the sport and don't put it into any sort of context.
That's the job. I do have that strong feeling. You weren't one of them, because you had enough intelligence and humility to learn your trade. I'm all for the people who've played sport to a high level, who come into my profession and start from the basement onwards, as you did. And no problem at all for me in that terms. It's a broad church. What I don't like is that people come into the profession, think they know everything, think they can interview. I think that's a really underrated art, the art of interviewing. Learn your trade. Just work out how you go about things. Keep your head down, work hard, and make your own luck eventually. But you've got to do the ground rules, and you've got to have basic legal training as well, which is available now to novitiate journalists. Just don't get yourself in trouble. But at the same time, don't sit on the fence. People want to hear something you've got to say. The acme for any sports broadcaster or journalist is it you're in the pub one night, you say, did you read what he said today in the paper? Or did you hear what he said on the radio? God, that was interesting. You always have to engage the people who pay your wages.
That's it. And so Peterborough to Birmingham, you stayed in the Midlands. Is that a plan or just the way it happened?
No plan. It was the only one out of 50 newspapers to give me an interview, for heaven's sake. I'd have gone to Invercockaliki or Dumbarton or Penzance to get a job in journalism. Just so happened, I'd say Peterborough was East Midlands, East Anglia. I wouldn't necessarily say it was the Midlands, but no, it was just one of those things. Came over here, lived in Birmingham in bachelor squalor for years. Friendly folk. My first week on Midlands Today television, I worked on the Birmingham pub bombings. And on that Thursday night, I started on the Monday, I was thrown in at the deep end with the various camera crews, and I got there rather too early for my life, for my peace of mind, and it stayed with me ever since. And yesterday was the 48th anniversary of the Birmingham pub bombings, and that's an experience I never wanted to have, but it all goes in the pot and you stir it around and you try to draw some strength from it. My sympathies entirely lie with those families, as they still do. But the key thing is you had to embrace that area, you had to embrace the philosophy, get to know the Brummies. I live out in Worcestershire now, glorious county. It's a case of not being distanced from where you live and walking down the road and talking to people and hearing what they have to say, going to the pub and just relating to what people who pay my wages want to know about.
But when you get something like, a call like the Birmingham pub bombings and you're very, very young, in one sense, it's a sort of a career opportunity, I suppose.
Rite of passage.
But on the other hand, it must be incredibly traumatic.
Frightening. Absolutely frightening. And the camera crews were fantastic. I'm sad to say that during that period, they were having a lot of experience of terrorist attacks in England. So that was a terrible, terrible time. And fast forward to 1989, again, we might come to that. I was the producer of the outside broadcast at Hillsborough with Peter Jones. And that was a dreadful, dreadful time. And I was down there in the interview area, seeing the black bags come past all that time and assessing what was going on. And it was a dreadful, dreadful time. Couldn't do couldn't do a football match for months and months. My bosses were brilliant. They let me get slap bang into county cricket very, very early in April '89. So I managed to get into cricket to just as some balm for the soul.
Yeah.
But I suppose I must have subconsciously tapped into my experience of the Birmingham pub bombings 50 years earlier to deal as producer to get information to Peter Jones as quickly as we possibly can. You were in the department at the time, weren't you?
Yeah, it was absolutely
dreadful,
and traumatic.
But, yeah, there's no point in having a career that lasts as mine has done for over 50 years without having some terrible times, vicissitudes, the hollows as well as the peaks.
But it sort of brings it home to you, doesn't it? That, people often say about sport, well, nobody died. Well, you can get things like Hillsborough and Heysel and, where they do. And it's absolutely awful.
Well, one thing, if I may say so, one meager attempt for me to buff up my brass buttons is the fact I've never referred to a tragic own goal or a disastrous back pass or a cataclysmic home defeat. It's only sport. And for heaven's sake, you have to detach yourself from reality when you're talking about something that's fundamentally escapism. Never use that kind of vocabulary or terminology when you're discussing sport.
No, absolutely right. And in the Midlands, you've settled and made the Midlands your home. Were you ever tempted to think, well, I ought to go to London, or that's where the jobs are, or whatever?
Resisted the temptation like a Dracula and a clove of garlic on many, many occasions. I was down there on what we call attachments. I remember World Cup '92. I remember being down there reading the sports news and doing a few programs. Blandishments were offered in my direction to go to London, but I never ever felt you had to operate out of London to be a front rank worthwhile broadcaster. I believe you should be able to spread your tentacles as far as you possibly can. I felt very strongly about being the representative of BBC national radio sport in the Midlands. I used to enjoy it when people referred to me on air as our man in the Midlands. I found myself thinking, well, in all modesty, I might have been making a bit of impression down the years. That is the case. And also, I feel very strongly about London-centric attitude towards politics, show business, sport, call it what you will. There's a big, wide United Kingdom out there. And I was always very, very hot on the regions and also a big supporter of local radio. Do anything for them. On my days off on Midlands Today, I started on Radio Birmingham doing football at Walsall, then West Brom, then with Aston Villa. And among my colleagues on Radio Birmingham in those days, 75 to about 80, on my days off, on my colleagues were Jim Rosenthal and Nick Owen. I don't know whatever happened to them. But for example,
they keep practicing, they might get there,
Indeed. But for example, we were born in the same year, within 3 months of each other, Nick, Jim and I, kindred spirits, and we still meet up. And next Wednesday down in Warwickshire, we're having yet another meetup, Nick, Jim and I, for a bibulous lunch whereby we'll gossip furiously, slag off all sorts of people, and remember to praise people that we like. You might get a mention in terms of
the only way. It's the only way to do it. It's fantastic. So the Midlands became your beat, and the beat then, did it have its boundaries, or was it a broad thing? I mean, you had the football clubs and the rugby cricket clubs.
There was always any amount of territorial warfare going on between me and London. What's he doing up here? I could do that. What's going on? Blah, 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 blah. That was always a source of great tension in terms of, hang on, I'm your bloke in the Midlands. I should be doing that. Why is he/she doing that one? Why am I not doing that game? Why am I not doing that? Why am I not covering Worcestershire that day? Why are you sending me to Lancashire? Etc., etc. There was some sort of commonality in my 18 cricket tours with England from 1986 to 2007, because at least when I was out on those tours, right, that's my patch. You let me get on with it. I'll stand or fall on my own efforts. But there's something wrong with any profession, Higgy, if you don't have tension between you and your bosses. What I will say on my behalf is that when I was researching my sports report book, all those bosses with whom I had ups and downs, mutual respect, but I was never short of expressing my view. Those bosses all helped me superbly with their anecdotes, and they all came to our launch that you were at early in October. So fair play to them. We managed to keep a respectful relationship. But as Harold Wilson once described his cabinet when he was Prime Minister, all those very clever Oxford dons, etc., who were in that cabinet, always round. He said creative tension was the hallmark of that cabinet. And I think with our department, when you were in it, there were any amount of talented people. There was no shortage of creative tension, was there?
Certainly a few egos, that's for sure.
Indeed.
So the Midland beat, that, I mean, you had it was the right in the football terms. It was Aston Villa, Nottingham Forest. It was a golden period, wasn't it, when those teams really shot to the top, and you were the man on the beat, as it were.
Yeah. I remember the 80/81 calendar year when I first started doing the job. At that time, Nottingham Forest were the reigning European champions. Brian Clough. Now, that's a separate programme on its own.
Yeah, I was going to say we'll have to get on. We'll have a little chat about it.
Notts County had just got promoted the first time from eternity, the oldest Football League club in the country. Nottinghamshire, as you well know, had just won the county championship under Clive Rice and Richard Hadley.
Yeah.
Torvill Dean reigned supreme.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, Nottingham. And Leicester Tigers were the best rugby club side. Well, even you would acknowledge that. Dusty hair club. So what a great area that was. And then Ron Saunders won the title with Aston Villa with 14 players, Higgy. 42 league games, he played 14 players. Half the time those players weren't fit, but they were terrified about dropping out. And then in 82, Tony Barton won the European Cup for Aston Villa. So what an introduction those first few years with me in terms of the department, getting Midland sports news on national radio. So it wasn't a major hardship. I didn't have to strive too far. Later on, in the 80s, the collapse of the manufacturing industry in the West Midlands, the fact that so few people used to go. Aston Villa used to get about 12,000, People forget that. There was a terrible, terrible time, hooliganism, all the rest of it. There wasn't really a beacon of brightness for the Midlands in the 80s thereafter until Coventry won the FA Cup in 87.
So an embarrassment of riches almost. I mean, how do you choose which club to go to, which story to follow, how to balance it all up and present the right balance of news?
Well, if Brian Clough takes the call and says, yes, Patrick, I'll take you tomorrow, get yourself there at that time, you go to Brian Clough, don't you? It's the easiest decision of all. During that time, I was personal friends with a lot of the England cricketers as well. I'd written 4 books with Bob Willis, who's then the England captain. Bob Taylor, I wrote 3 books with him, great England wicketkeeper, you know all that. I spent a lot of time writing 2 books with 2 of your Gloucestershire colleagues, Mike Proctor and Brian Brain. I had massive friendships in the cricket world also. So I'd often nip out and see them during the winter for a few pints and catch up. And I repeat, you must show your face, you must keep in touch. Priorities, yes. Eventually I'd end up saying, well, you're paid for this, to the bosses, you make the decision. Am I going to Leicester today? Am I going to Villa? Where am I going? In those days, things were easier. No press conferences, no press officer telling you what to do. You ring up the manager or the manager's secretary and say, can I come such and such? The word would come back, yeah, come whenever it is, blah, blah, blah. But you never did that with Brian Clough. You used to have to chase him up and get him on the phone. No secretary, no assistant.
Really?
Tell him what to do. Yeah. Oh, I've turned up at Cloughie in those days, and he knew his value, by the way. He knew he was box office. And we, by the way, BBC never paid Cloughie a penny. He'd have exclusive contracts with tabloid newspapers. We never paid him a penny. He respected Eamon Andrews, Sports Report, Des Lynam, and Brian Butler immensely. So I got lucky because I picked up the torch. I'd bring the occasional bunch of flowers for Barbara, his wife, which he appreciated. But he's kept me out there sometimes for 6 hours in my car.
Really?
Then he ushered me in and he said, hey, come on, you got 5 minutes.
Oh, God.
20 minutes later, he's still talking. And I'm thinking, my God, this is gold dust. This bit will make Cliff Morgan's Sport on 4 on Saturday afternoon. This bit will make the sports desk on Friday night. This bit will make the preview to the Forest commentary game, 2 o'clock Saturday afternoon, gold dust. And at the end, he's saying, there you are, Patrick, you'll get something out of that. And he often used to say in a good ear, he said, hey, right, Patrick, that's your out. Because he knew how it worked. He was a diamond. He was a tyrant, incredibly rude, hugely difficult, massive ego, but generous when he liked you. I spent the last 10 years of his life with him doing lots of things and treasure those times. He's the most fascinating person I've interviewed in all my career. And may I say, I interviewed people like Margaret Thatcher when she was leader of the opposition, Sir Keith Joseph, Rod Stewart, Hughie Green, Sean Connery, all sorts of people across the board. Brian Clough is the most amazing person I've ever interviewed. Those deep hazel brown eyes would just look at you and seek you out and check out whether you're a phony or not. Once I sat there with him and a local radio lad had managed to get an interview with him. He came in, pulled out a sheaf of questions. Clough looked at me. I thought, I know what's happening here. Clough used to demand that you did your research. Oh, you do know what you're talking about then. I remember saying to him one time, it's Edith Piaf time then, Brian. No regrets. Well done, Patrick. You do know what you're talking about. This lad sat there, asked the question. The first question he asked, Cloughy leant over, picked up the paper, threw it into the waste paper bin at the far end of the office. He gave me that because it went straight in. He said, now, young man, where are you going now? I'll say something to you, young man. You got a couple of minutes to get out of this office. Stop smoking, because I can smell it off you, because I remember when I smoked, Barbara didn't like it. Sort your diet out, because you got a terrible complexion. And I've just looked out the window. You got a scruffy old car. I bet it's full of baggy crisps and all sorts of rubbish. Just sort yourself out. I wish you well in your next career, because it's sure as hell not going to be broadcasting. Then he points at me. He said, unlike that bald old bugger over there, off you go, son. I never knew what happened to that local radio sports reporter. And I'm sat there thinking, oh my God. But at the same time, that lad was badly advised by his sport editor. And Cloughy sitting there saying, don't you pull out a string of questions to ask me. I'm Brian Clough. He had a blast furnace of an ego, Alastair.
But on the other hand, you have to be prepared. You have to know what you're talking about, and you have to have a sort of thread for doing an interview as to where you want it eventually to get to, haven't you?
You've got to keep it up there, though. I expostulate at the TV when I see interviewers doing various interviews across the board, not just politics, but when I see them with their notes on their lap or in front of them, it drives me crackers. I've never done that. Never, ever have I done that. You're quite right. You have to have a format in your mind, but you've got to be flexible. My God, when I interviewed Cloughy, December '86, I got him live on Sports Report for the first time for 5 years. And Jeff Cook was with me. And he came in with 2 huge tumblers of whiskey at 5 o'clock, Cloughy. And I introduced him to Jeff, and they ascertained that their respective fathers had worked together in Middlesbrough down the years. Cloughy snatched the whiskey out of my hand. He said, here, you have that, Jeffrey. It's wasted on that blankety blank me. So we start the interview. I said, Brian, we just got to wait till the James Alexander read the sport. Oh, come on. I said, even you've got to wait for James Alexander Gordon doing the football results. Only if you say it's 4-5-4, East 5-5, Patrick. So, off we go. And then he's been difficult. And I said, I just said that because I was quizzing about Margaret Thatcher and the membership scheme and young Nigel. Never spoke before about young Nigel, the number 9. On and on it's going. Sweat's pouring down my face. I'd forgotten to tell him it was live because he used to like the old Anglo-Saxon copulative adverb slipping in. Hey, that'll test your editors out, son. Let's see how good they are, those engineers. Right at the end of all, the editor, Mike Lewis, who you know, the editor, is saying to me, keep going. I'm thinking, I've done 7 minutes on Sports Report at 5:05. You stop everything. Hey, what were the scores, Patrick? I'd memorized the scores because I knew he was going to ask me. Right, okay, right, carry on. He knew the scores, testing me out.
Really?
Right at the end, I was off to Australia the next day with Mike Gatting's team, 86-87, that won everything bar the Melbourne Cup, if you remember right. Gatting, Gladstone, Small.
Chris Brody,
And he said, pause. Thanks a lot, Brian. You've been on Sports Report for the first time in 5 years. Big mistake. Because that indicated I was praising myself. I wasn't. I was just trying to get out of the interview. and get a pint in the Jubilee Club. And Clough looked at me with those deep hazel brown eyes, and there was a silence. He said, Patrick, you come back from Australia a little bit more talented than you are today. Ta-da. Now, I didn't mind all that because I'd got the gold dust, and it was all over the papers the next day.
Yeah.
And only one or two of the papers, not the overwhelming majority, who were then and still are hostile to the BBC because of their commercial interests.
Yeah.
People like Murdoch and non-DOMs like the Rothermeres. None of them mention the BBC. They all dress it up as their own interview. There's a surprise. Anyway, I think I earned my corn that day, Alastair, but I'd factored in all things that I'd learned down the years, and also dealing with Cloughie and knowing how you operate with a particular egotist.
Yeah, you get a sort of stockpile of things behind you, don't you? If
you know where to go.
Yeah. So you must, I mean, the actual nuts and bolts of it, you must have put a few miles on your car's clock.
Yeah.
Doing those daily interviews around the Midlands. And then back in those days, we started with those great big heavy tape recorder things. And
massive things.
Razor blades and yellow tape and stuff like that. You must have got a few fingers.
Alastair, I got so lucky that I got away with most of the razor blades because we had working at Pebble Mill. I knew all the engineers and working on Midlands Day on television. Right. When I'd sort of ring up and say, "Can anybody spare me 15 minutes or so?" I'd see them in the bar. I'd look after them. They'd help me out. Or failing that, I'd send it down from our studio at Pebble Mill down to Broadcasting House and let them get on with it while telling them what I thought were the best bits.
Yeah.
And it was, you're right. That was an issue, but I managed to get away with that bluff. And it saved me time. I'd be saying, well, don't waste my time in the studio. I could be out doing another interview. West Brom's just down the road. Wolves, Aston Villa, Birmingham City. Let me get on with things. Alf Ramsey managed Birmingham City at one stage, before I got there in radio. But there were still interesting people there. In terms of driving, one more thing I meant to mention to you, forget the East Midlands or the West Midlands on my patch. Norwich City and Ipswich Town were on my patch.
Really?
And in those days, in those days, they had very interesting guys like John Bond.
Yeah.
Bobby Robson was manager then. So in the early days, I dealt with them. I remember one occasion going to Ipswich from Worcestershire down the A45. My God, that's a journey, 180 miles there. I had to do Ipswich, Manchester United that night, but I had to be back for a doctor's appointment nearby, which I had to get to at 9:15 the following morning. So therefore, I had to drive to Ipswich and back in the day, as well as doing the match and then interviews afterwards. The score, Ipswich 0, Manchester United 0. Correct.
Yeah, correct. 40 seconds of deathless prose about that, I'm sure.
We had football that night, so I was in and out of the programme. But you're right about the deathless prose, Alastair.
Brilliant stuff. So the cricket as well. I mean, again, you had a good sort of background. The Midlands counties were strong, as you mentioned before. And then to get on the tours, how did you manage to wangle getting on the tours as well?
Oh, is there an element of envy there, Alastair? Wangle. Oh, right. Well, good working relationship with a lot of the players help. I did my first book in 1977 with Bob Willis about the art of fast bowling. Then I did Bob Taylor, and then I did a Diary of the 78-9 Australian tour with the young Gower and Bob Taylor. They sent me airmails. They sent me their thoughts by airmail back here when I was on Midlands Today. And then I interviewed them massively when they came back. Did an interview, did the book with Graham Gooch. And in 79, the publisher took a punt on this young lad. We had to do 60,000 words. I remember Gucci, shy but dry sense of humor, saying, "Oh, Pat, we've got to do 60,000 words here. I don't know about you. I've only got 2 thoughts on batting. If it's in my half of the wicket, I hit it really hard. And you've got to have confidence in your own ability. Can we get 60,000 words out of that?" which I duly did. And then we come to 1980, when you were around. I did Brian Brain's Diary of a Season for him, which became a book. Having done that was 2 years running. In the Cricketer magazine. I don't know what Brainy said to you about those monthly articles, but John Arlott told me off. John Arlott said, "Your name should be on them. Brian Brain's not writing them. It should be as told to Pat Murphey." The great man giving me a rollicking. And then I did Procky's book,
Yeah.
Mike Proctor's book, Farewell to Cricket. Did Basil D'Oliveira's Farewell to Cricket, forward by John Arlott. Massive thrill, because they were my two big heroes. And so I then kept building up relationships with various people, Mike Gatting and all the rest of them. So I then started doing Test cricket as a reporter for the old Radio 2 in 1982. I remember, you remember Don Mosey put a good word in for me, because I wasn't part of that Oxbridge set. I was a grammar school boy in the university life, and very happy to be so. So I managed to get into all that. And then 86, 87, I was writing a biography of Ian Botham with his cooperation and many, many, many others. Yeah. And I told the bosses that I wanted to take some time off to join Botham in Australia, because that was a seminal tour for him, signing for Queensland and obviously helping them win the Ashes. And they let me go, and I managed to get great stuff off Botham and did a few of the test matches and managed to pull up some important interviews with England players. And Chris Lander, dear old Chris Lander, and I were the only two journalists in Ian Botham's suite the night they won the Ashes, retained the Ashes in December 1986. And Elton John, believe it or not, was the DJ, and he was playing old newfangled things called CDs. And he got his manager to get lots and lots of CDs for him, and he was DJ all night while we drank magnificent wine with all the England players: Chris Broad, Bill Athey, Gladstone Small. I'm godfather of Gladstone's eldest son, for example. So they're all pals. And Elton John that night, Alastair, didn't play one of his tracks. What about that?
Gosh, that is fantastic.
I thought that was brilliant. So thereafter,
you're on the beat.
But at the same time, I quite enjoyed it. There'd be the producers battling for my services. We want them to do football. No, we want them to go off and do an England tour. So that sort of stuff. I said, well, you sort it out, lads.
Fantastic.
You fight over my services, please.
Best way to be. So,
and we'll skip the fact that I never get a bonus either.
Yes. Consider yourself lucky.
You were lucky.
How did you get into book writing? Did the book come to you, or did you say, I've got an idea for a book,
always
take it to a publisher, or the other way around?
Always wanted to be a writer.
Yeah.
Massive reader. When I was at university, I was in 3 book clubs: World Books, Complete Works of Shakespeare, and the Complete Works of Somerset Maugham. My mates could not work out that I didn't read any law books. Managed to get myself a second. Bluff my way through it. But I've always been a voracious reader. When I was a kid, I was always in the library. If I read the daily newspapers, we couldn't afford papers. I read the daily newspapers in the library, and whenever there's a word I did not know, I'd stand up and mug it up in the encyclopedia dictionary rather, and memorize it. So I always focused all that into my mind. Bob Willis was a pal of mine. He turned down Kerry Packer, 1997, and I knew he was cobbling together a package whereby he'd do various deals. Knocked on his door one day, fancy doing a book? He said, funny you should say that. I've got to. Come on in. He fancied one. I remember we had a Campari and soda. I just come back from holiday in Portugal. What was I drinking? Campari and soda. So off we went. Worked out okay. So I was a ghost in those days. He used to call me Banquo. So I ghosted those books. And then I did my first book under my own name called The Spinner's Turn in 1982, which was a lament for the lost art of slow bowling. And I talked to, among others, down your way, Bomber Wells, David Allen, John Mortimer, as well as Richie Benno, Eric Hollies, Jim Lake. Fantastic. And the foreword, very proud of this, Alastair. I hope you'll get this, bearing in mind he was very much a man of the establishment, unlike myself. And he actually lived on the ground at Lord's, one Gubby Allen.
Oh, yeah.
Gubby Allen was so taken by the manuscript that Doug Insall showed him, because Doug was very helpful to me via Bob Willis, via Graham Gooch, the S's connection. Doug talked to me about batting against Sonny Ramadan and Ray East and all this sort of stuff. He put a word into Gubby for me. I got summoned to Lord's to meet
Gubby Allen. Yes.
Indeed. Said, Murphey, I'm quite taken by all this. So I thought cheekily, if you're that taken, Mr. Allen, how about writing a foreword for me? Okay, do it.
Really?
John Arlott picked up on that. John said to me, how did you get him? And I was...
Cheek. Well, sometimes it helps, doesn't it? Yeah.
If you don't ask, you don't get, Alastair.
So I'm go back to the question, do you have the idea for the books and go to the publisher? I mean, obviously you started off in ghosting.
Bit of both.
Now, you just say, I've got an idea for a book.
Bit of both. When Brian Clough died, insensitively, two publishers rang me the next day to say, I think you should update your book that you wrote on Brian Clough in 1993, which I duly did. I rewrote the whole thing because I wasn't happy with it in 2004. But it was my idea to write Clough's biography when he retired in May 1993. It was my idea to write The Spinner's Turn. It was my idea to write the book on the 20 batsmen who scored 100 first-class hundreds. At that time, as you know, Zahir was the last Euro County teammate. From Grace to Zahir, and there are 4 Gloucestershire connections there. Grace, Hammond, Tom Graveney, and Zahir. And then it was my idea, 20 odd years later, to update it to 25, and Ramprakash became the 25th, and in my opinion, the last. No one will ever score 25 100 first-class hundreds again, because you don't play enough cricket. So those are my ideas, and the Sports Report book was emphatically my idea.
Your idea.
Something that I know that was in me, lockdown coincided, got me thinking I've got to keep my brain going. But I suppose, Alice, if you pin me up against the wall, of the 40-odd books that I've done, some have kept me in Chill Chablis, others have kept me in Montrachet, and some have played for the West Wing at Murphey Towers. But the ones that for me are the best ones, that I'm most proud of the ones that I've had the idea for. That might be a coincidence. I've not thought about it until you mentioned it, but that might be the case. But certainly the Sports Report, my idea all the way through, labour of love, a love letter to the programme that I always wanted to work on.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, if you've got the idea yourself, you're dancing to your own tune, as it were. But there again, how do you set about doing it? How do you discipline yourself to do all the research, to put it all into the order that you choose? And because, some books that sort of have a natural sequence, don't they? But you would have to choose virtually everything from that. How do you set about that?
Well, first of all, the Sports Report book is the best example of all, because I was conscious that it's 75 years old. And I'm conscious of the fact that it started in 1948 when Clement Attlee was Prime Minister. It's gone all the way from Clement Attlee to Rishi Sunak. And the Queen had just got married, for God's sake. It's an astonishing span. It was the year that the NHS was born. No black boxer could fight for the British titles and when Sports Report started. So the span is enormous. So as a historian, I studied history at school. I was interested in that sweep.
Yeah.
Also, I thought, I'm not going to do it chapter 1, 40s, chapter 2, 50s, all the way through, because people like you were born in 1955. You, despite being a sports fan, you would probably think, am I all that interested in the 40s, 50s? I'm rather keener on when I started following sport, in your case, 60s, early 70s. And I thought, punters aren't going to buy that if it's just a chronological tale. So I went for themes, great programs, great interviews, great presenters. What is it like at the sharp end when you turn up at matches, when you're bullied by security people, and where TV ruled the roost and radio has to fight valiantly and on its own, opening people's eyes to just what it has to be done in the studio, the crises that happen, the various things. You know what it's like. How Sports Report gets out with about 7 people working in that studio is remarkable. And Patrick Collins, a columnist in the Mail on Sunday, gave me a great description. He said, I used to appear on it regularly doing my essays, rushing in from Highbury, Tottenham, whatever. I never knew how that programme got on. It's the weekly miracle. Patrick, that'll do for me. You play the Sports Report theme tune earlier on, Alastair. That was called Out of the Blue, written in 1931 by a guy called Hubert Bath, who worked with Hitchcock, who did lots of Hollywood musicals, and he died in 1945, 3 years before the programme saw the light of day. Angus Mackay, the producer, produced the programme for 24 years. Angus did not have a signature tune. 2 hours before the first programme, still couldn't get one. Got a call from the music library, come down here, listen to this. That's it, got it, eureka, light bulb moment. He got Out of the Blue. So I did a chapter on that because I tracked down grandson. And Tim Rice, here's a name drop for you, friend of mine, Sunderland supporter. Tim said, if you lot ever drop that signature tune, it's like taking Don't Cry for Me, Argentina out of Evita. I said,
Uh,
Tim, that's a quote.
that's a good quote. We'll have that one. Yeah.
I did the future at the end, the various problems that sports reports had down the years, the political interference. The program never got a full hour until 1955. 7 years. It was half an hour. And people talk now about the crisis we face because it's half an hour at the moment for the next couple of years or so. But for the first 7 years, when sport was preeminent and radio was preeminent, long before Grandstand, it was only on for half an hour at 5:30. So sports reports had its vicissitudes. So Alistair, I thought all that was a lot more interesting. And I got people from other walks of life. So Andy Burnham, massive sports report fan, used to listen to it when his family were off at Everton, too young to go, and they'd come back and tell him about the game, and Andy had listened to our report on Everton. Lee Child, who writes the Jack Reacher books, talked to me in Colorado, massive Aston Villa fan. He couldn't have been more helpful. David Blunkett talked to me about the importance of the program to blind people. And that really helped me, because I now still make sure I say it was beaten to the goalkeeper's left foot shot 25 yards out. That's for blind people. So lots of other people who weren't necessarily associated with sport gave me thoughts, which I really love. So as it all gets into a picture, then you get the disciplines and everything else, which is a different argument.
It must have taken a huge number of telephone calls and recordings to get, because you spoke, as you said, to so many people and distilled their thoughts and ideas and opinions into what I think is a fantastic book. And
Thank you.
For all of you out there, it's a must for your Christmas presents. You've got a copy here, haven't we? Yes,
I just happen to have it here, Alastair.
Yeah, well, honestly, everybody look at that and make a beeline to your nearest bookshop.
It's all about you, but I love that front cover, don't you?
Yeah, it's really, really good. It's beautifully done.
Actually, I'm very, very proud of it. The various people who give me some great quotes. Joe Root gave me a great quote about the book. As a kid, he always listened to what we thought of Sheffield United, and that was lovely. I talked to all the presenters. Eamon Andrews finished in 1964. Sadly, Peter Jones, who did presenting in the late 60s, died young, but I knew Peter enough anyway to get lots of stuff there about him. But I got every regular presenter from 1964, apart from Peter, right up until now, Mark Chapman, including 90-year-old Liam Nolan living in Galway. He did it for the first 4 years after Eamon, and he sent me a lovely postcard the other day, and I was absolutely thrilled to get it. So it was a labour of love. I did 165 interviews, but Alastair, I went back to him 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, that kind of stuff. So just checking things. So I probably did about 400 interviews. It was a lockdown book, as I say. It like Topsy, it grew out a life of its own. And I was finally delivering 4 weeks before publication, bringing up to date the fact that the classified football results had been dropped, and bringing up to date the fact that we were now finishing at 5:30 to accommodate live Premier League football commentary at 5:30. So nobody can accuse me, I hope, of saying that it's not up to date. It's as bang up to date as it possibly can. When I first started doing football books, the gestation period was like a humpback whale. It'd been months before the book ever came out, but not now.
And the extraordinary thing about a sports report, as you say, it started off, I mean, now we think sport is where it is in our national consciousness. Sport, just after the war, was not really that big. And Angus Mackay, as you said, had to fight to get a sports programme on the air.
All Angus's career as a sports report producer was a fight. I'm trying to look for a statistic, Alastair, to underline just how big football was in the immediate post-war period, because it was absolutely massive. Record attendances, 48-49, the year that Sports Report started in terms of the football season. 48-49, it was the greatest, I haven't got it, the greatest amount of attendances of league football ever. So it was the opium of the masses, but sport was viewed to be slightly below stairs on radio. Like entertainment was important, drama, classical music, workers' playtime, that kind of stuff. But sport, no. So you could not get the football results on the radio until 6:15 on Saturday night. Angus got them on at 5:30. And it was an enormous change. People used to have to queue up for their pink gun and their green and all the rest of it at 6:15. But now it's on radio. It just makes you realise, why did it take so long for sport to be on national radio?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the impression I got from reading the book, was that, sport is so much a part of, I mean, not just of my life and your life, but of the national life.
Yes.
We've gone mad about the World Cup at the moment, and we go mad about cricket Ashes series and so on, and yet it was pretty marginal.
It was, in terms of how the BBC viewed it. The BBC had a very, very antediluvian, empire-based attitude towards broadcasting after the war. We were healing, weren't we? The formula of the BBC radio was very, very important and consoling in the war. J.B. Priestley's fireside chats, Winston Churchill's broadcasts, Arthur Askey, Vera Lynn, Gracie Fields. All of that had its special place, of course it did. But young people like Michael Parkinson and Cliff Morgan, growing up in that immediate sports war period, who contributed to the book, Paddy Barclay, myself to a certain extent, we knew the importance of sport out there, away from the cloistered area of the BBC. And it took a long time for the BBC to loosen its stays and actually realize that sport has so much to offer. And thereafter, we had a clear run until TV girded its loins and started really pushing on in the 60s. But once we got started for an hour and 55 on Sports Report, the world was our lobster, because we got everybody on. And Eamon Andrews, Alastair, I'm trying to get an analogy for modern listeners and viewers to this. Eamon Andrews as a personality was a combination of, let's say, Anton Deck, Terry Wogan, Claire Balding, Gary Lineker, all sorts of famous presenters and luminaries. He was the most famous presenter of his age, and he gave us 12 years of his time, as well as doing all the This Is Your Life and Miss World and all that sort of stuff. He was a marvelous presenter and a massive friend of the program until the day he died.
Yeah, he was. I mean, I remember reading not only your book, but about him and This Is Your Life. He was a visionary. He knew what people might want. I think he went across to America and saw this Is Your Life program and thought,
yes,
we can do that over here. And but he had the vision as well as the charm, the persuasiveness to get things to happen. The
secretaries, the PAs loved him. I managed to track down one lady who was in her 90s, and she said Eamon was just a gem. He always asked about our families, never forgot presents. He did everything for the backroom staff. They absolutely adored and revered him. And accent, check his voice. He has such a distinctive accent. He was from Dublin.
Yeah.
But in addition to the Dublin accent, he listened to a guy called Stuart McPherson from Canada, who was a brilliant hockey commentator on the radio. And he picked up that North Atlantic twang. So if you listen, Alastair, as you have done, you will notice there's a bit of North American in that accent, but it was so distinctive.
Yes.
Everybody knew it as Eamon Andrews. And you surely, before you got into broadcasting, you must have known how important it was for radio voices to sound different.
They have to be different. Yeah, they have to be distinctive.
How often were you on Sports Report?
Oh, very few times. I started my career working at the back, trying to tell people, take this report in, cut that, do that, and it was so tense because you were at the back and trying to. Our journey just started in radio, but I was told to judge when the 30 seconds was up and what were the outwords and feed those through to the editor. Oh,
have you still got a finger left?
Oh, like you.
Those razor blades. Oh,
yeah. So and Sports Report was, even then, I mean, I remember being a player and listening to the results. Silence would fall in our dressing room at Bristol.
Yes.
And up came the music, and we were all half changing and half listening to what's going on, and dead silence when the rugby roundup came on, and everybody, and it was so important to so many people.
Yes,
playing the sport, listening to it. I remember listening to it at school. So it was an institution, and I suppose the youngsters these days maybe are not as fond of radio, it's not as big a part of their lives. So it's good for us old things to say that was a fantastic time, but to explain the significance of it. to a next generation. I think you've done that extraordinarily well in the book.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, you need to talk about things like pools coupons. People need to know. Your dad would be sitting in the pools. Have we won anything this week?
Yeah.
Your mum would be making the tea, or there'd be muffins by the fire, or the coal. You go out and get the coal in. Your granddad would sit alongside you. Oh, I remember Cliff Bass and Ted Drake, much better players than today. All that warmth, all that communality. Yeah. Terry Wogan once said on his final broadcast on Radio 2, "Thank you for being my friend." And I think that's a really important area of radio, that communality, which TV does not have. By the way, the listening figures are still standing up with our other competitors at the same time on local radio, with respect to them, commercial radio, TV, both BBC and Sky. We're still standing up. Okay, obviously it's much more diverse now. Fewer people listen to it. That's across the board with all outlets. So don't let people run away with the idea that we're on our last knockings.
No.
Have we got another 25 runs in this before we get our century? I don't know. Nostradamus can view that one. You might be here. I shan't be here.
But what you've done, though, is produce this lovely picture of a slice of our lives and the time and how we felt and how society was and how it all married together, which I think is just a fantastic thing.
That's kind of you. It was important. It was
really
important.
Good. And I think if you hold the book up again, we can just maybe suggest to people who might be looking for a Christmas present, this is really what you should be doing. If any of you have got all of those lovely memories of sport, of times when you gathered around the fire or around the radio and listened to things, that is the book you should be reading. It's brilliant, I think. And it's been fantastic to be able to talk to you, Pat. And just briefly, we're going to say, well, what is the future? What is the future for you? What is the future for Sports Report? What is the future for radio sport?
Well, in terms of myself, I'm still doing football on the Saturdays, Alastair. I gave up doing cricket 5 years ago. I just felt my race had run. I've always been very, very hot on nobody ever being the person who tapped me on my shoulder and saying, your time's up. We've rumbled you, Murphey. And I just thought, right, they were becoming long days, previews before a ball was bowled, 2 days, etc., etc. So I'm still doing football. I wanted to work on Sports Report still, and the BBC bosses were very, very accommodating. So I'm still there, still part of the furniture, I hope, on the Saturday. In terms of the programme itself, I do believe it's got legs left in it. The key thing is that we have enough matches on 3 o'clock on Saturday afternoons. We need as many as we possibly can. If the clubs take over TV deals and they're on a Friday night, a Saturday morning, a Saturday night, a Sunday morning, all over the shop, the whole weekend, Friday and Monday, Sports Report might struggle to get enough live football, because whether you like it or not, and I'm sure you appreciate that, even though you're a rugby man, football drives the programme. And if there isn't enough live football to cover at 5 o'clock on the Saturday, that is a problem. I've been reassured by all the bosses I've talked to that Sports Report is still the most important of programmes. Roger Mosey, who's controller of 5 Live, who's now master at Selwyn College, Cambridge, when he was the boss of us in the early 200s, he said, Sports Report was the most important programme of the week on 5 Live. And he said, I believe it still is. I do not know what the bosses think, but it is as far as I'm concerned. So that's a former controller of 5 Live.
And you're also in sports journalism, you're lecturing in sports journalism. Distill for us, what's the key thing you'd say to aspiring sports journalists? What's the most important things they've got to do?
Be different. Don't strive to be different. Just be naturally different. Bear that in mind. Develop contacts. Get people who want to talk to you, who ring you back. Make sure they've got your number. Go to every game, whatever it is, and come back with a number, even if it's only the kit man. Get yourself known. Don't hide behind the desk. Get out, buy a pint for somebody, and get to know people, and be your own person. Always risk, if necessary, falling out with people because you express your views strongly. Don't be a patsy. Be independent.
Be a Pat Murphey. That's fantastic. Fantastic advice, Pat.
I don't know about that.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on this programme and sharing your wisdom and your great insights into sport. And
I remember once you actually said to me, when are you going to do my book? When I was doing Brain and Property. We never got round to it, Alastair.
Got past that now, but thank you so much for coming on the programme, Pat.
Take care.
And wish you all the best in the future. So that's Pat Murphy, and we look forward to another one of these Passion, Purpose and Grit programs in a couple of weeks. Bye.